In my last article on this subject, I argued that the police staffing crisis is real, but that it is not just a staffing problem. Hiring bonuses, faster background processes, pay increases, and better schedules may help fill vacancies, but they do not fix legitimacy. And you'll never be fully staffed when the only people applying just want a paycheck and don't believe they are joining something bigger than themselves. This follow-up is about one of the reasons legitimacy keeps slipping away: soft corruption. When people hear police corruption, they usually picture the obvious version: a cop taking money from drug traffickers, a detective planting evidence, a supervisor covering up a use of force, an officer falsifying a warrant affidavit. That is hard corruption. It is direct, serious, usually criminal, and when exposed, it often produces public outrage, as it should. Soft corruption is different. Soft corruption is the daily dishonesty, favoritism, selfishness, retaliation, selective accountability, corner-cutting, exaggeration, and institutional excuse-making that happens inside agencies long before the public ever sees it. It may not always be criminal. It may not always result in termination. Sometimes it is dismissed as how things are done. But it matters because every one of those acts teaches the public, the courts, prosecutors, victims, suspects, and honest officers the same lesson. The agency will protect itself before it protects the truth. That is a public trust problem, and it is also a staffing problem. Good officers do not want to work in agencies where honesty is treated as optional, where reporting misconduct makes you the problem, where internal investigations are used harder against disfavored employees than against favored ones, or where management buries mistakes until a public records request, lawsuit, body camera video, or news story drags the truth into daylight. The public sees the same thing from the outside. They may not know the policy manual, they may not know the discipline matrix, they may not know what Brady, Giglio, Garrity, or internal affairs mean, but they know when something smells wrong. Soft corruption can be as simple as an officer lying to a citizen because he thinks the lie is convenient. Associated Press reported on a Michigan case where a black man alleged he was detained while walking and asked for a supervisor. According to AP, the officer identified another officer as a supervisor even though that person was not one. And the police chief later said in a deposition that officers can lie in the field when not under oath. It makes sense during an undercover operation. It is poison when used to dodge accountability. That kind of thinking is poison. Not because it is the worst misconduct imaginable, because it is not. It is poison because it normalizes dishonesty in everyday moments. And low-stakes dishonesty has a way of becoming high-stakes dishonesty. When careers, lawsuits, criminal cases, or public embarrassment are on the line. The research on police legitimacy is not hidden. The national academies describe procedural justice as depending on whether police give people a voice, make decisions neutrally and without bias, treat people with dignity and respect, and appear trustworthy and benevolent in motive. The same report emphasized that public judgments about legitimacy are shaped by how people experience police action. That is why soft corruption matters. It attacks every one of those legitimacy points. When an officer lies, neutrality disappears. When supervisors ignore misconduct by favored employees, fairness disappears. When an agency hides mistakes instead of explaining them, trustworthiness disappears. When whistleblowers are isolated or retaliated against, the internal moral structure of the agency disappears. And when the public eventually finds out, the damage is worse than if the agency had simply admitted the mistake in the first place. We have seen variations of this across the country. In Boston, federal prosecutors charged 9 police officers in an overtime fraud scheme. The U.S. Attorney's Office said the alleged misconduct involved stealing taxpayer money year after year, and the U.S. Attorney specifically noted that official misconduct erodes trust in public institutions. In California, the State Attorney General announced charges against 54 current and former California Highway Patrol officers in an alleged multi-year overtime fraud scheme involving more than $226,000. The Attorney General directly tied the case to trust, stating that trust is a critical part of successful law enforcement. Those cases involve money, but the larger issue is not only the dollars, it is the attitude. It is the belief that the rules are flexible when the person bending them wears the badge. The same principle applies when agencies bury, minimize, or slow walk embarrassing mistakes. Similar public trust questions have surfaced elsewhere. In Aurora, Colorado, CBS News Colorado reported that an officer was found drunk behind the wheel of a running Aurora police vehicle while on duty, had a blood alcohol level more than 5 times the legal limit, was not arrested or charged with DUI because command staff treated the incident as a medical situation. A medical situation it may be, but nobody thinks they would have been spared the DUI in the exact same circumstances. 9 times out of 10, they would not have been. The legitimacy question is, when the person in trouble wears a badge, does the agency apply the same standard it would apply to everyone else? When departments answer that question with technical explanations, quiet discipline, or no meaningful consequence, they may win the narrow legal argument while losing the broader public trust argument. That example is not about accusing every involved employee of corruption. It is about the public-facing problem that occurs when an outcome is followed by technical explanations that sound more like institutional defense than accountability. Maybe the agency has a policy argument, maybe it has a legal argument, but the public trust question is broader. Did the agency fully own what happened, explain it plainly, and show what would change? When departments answer only the narrow legal question, they often lose the broader legitimacy question. In Prince George's County, Maryland, a former police officer alleged that she was sexually assaulted by a police lieutenant and then retaliated against after the matter came to light. Utah reported that the former officer said the internal investigation leaked, after which she became the target of rumors, verbal abuse, and harassment from fellow officers. UJLA later reported that a federal jury found it was the custom of the Prince George's County Police Department to blackball officers who report misconduct, and that a federal judge ultimately ordered the county to pay her $2.2 million. The case illustrates the same cultural problem. When an officer reports misconduct, the agency's reaction can become as damaging to public trust as the original allegation. Again, the legal outcome is separate from the cultural point. The public, prosecutors, co-workers, and future employees all notice when agencies appear to treat some people with patience and others with force. Selective accountability is one of the clearest forms of soft corruption because it tells everyone inside the building that truth is not the deciding factor. Individual status is. This is not limited to one agency. The Department of Justice's Chicago investigation found that unconstitutional force was tied in part to deficiencies in accountability systems, misconduct investigations, training, supervision, and data collection. DOJ also identified concerns about racially discriminatory conduct and the degree to which it was tolerated or caused by failures in training, supervision, and accountability. In Louisville, DOJ found reasonable cause to believe the police department and local government engaged in a pattern or practice of conduct violating constitutional rights, including excessive force, unlawful discrimination against Black people, invalid warrant searches, and violations of protected speech. DOJ also identified deficiencies in the department's response to sexual assault and domestic violence, including allegations involving officers. Reasonable people can debate federal oversight, consent decrees, political motivations, and methodology. But no serious police leader should need DOJ to tell them that dishonesty, retaliation, favoritism, bad supervision, and weak internal accountability destroy public confidence. Gallup reported in 2024 that confidence in police had risen to 51%, up from a record low of 43% the prior year, but still below earlier highs, including 64% in 2004. That means there is room to rebuild. It also means the profession cannot afford to keep pretending that public trust is damaged only by major scandals. Major scandals break trust quickly, and soft corruption drains it slowly. Soft corruption is not always dramatic or newsworthy, but it always damages the profession and adds fuel to officer burnout. Sometimes it is a small lie in a report. Sometimes it is an officer telling a citizen that something isn't prosecutable or isn't worth investigating because the call is inconvenient, time-consuming, or unlikely to make good stats. Sometimes it is lying to another investigator to cover incompetence, negligence, laziness, or a bad decision. Sometimes it is an administrator rewriting, reframing, or altering a subordinate's work product to support a preferred agenda while still leaving the original employee's name attached to the conclusion. Sometimes it is uneven discipline, walking one employee out for a violation while letting others commit the same or worse conduct with no meaningful consequence. Sometimes it is management ignoring established law or policy when dealing with employees because they assume no one will challenge them. Sometimes it is manipulating promotional, specialty team, or assignment processes to elevate friends, loyalists, and yes men, while freezing out people who question the status quo. Sometimes it is a supervisor who looks away, a public statement that is technically accurate but intentionally incomplete, a mistake buried until litigation exposes it, an internal affairs investigation that answers the safest question instead of the meaningful one, or a command staff that treats embarrassment as a greater threat than misconduct. Those things not only hurt the public, they hurt the honest officers who are trying to do the job correctly. One could have the opinion that police line burnout is 80% co-workers and administration, 20% stressful work. Police work depends on trust in every direction. The public has to trust officers. Officers have to trust supervisors. Prosecutors have to trust reports. Judges have to trust testimony. Victims have to trust that their cases will not be compromised by ego, laziness, bias, or internal politics. Good cops have to trust that doing the right thing will not make them radioactive or a target. Soft corruption breaks all of that. The solution is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable to those in the industry. Departments need to expand the working definition of betraying the public trust. It should not be limited to taking bribes, stealing evidence, planting drugs, or committing crimes. It should include dishonest reports, retaliatory investigations, intentional omissions, favoritism, abuse of overtime, misleading public statements, failure to correct known errors, and protecting insiders at the expense of truth. Basically, everything in the paragraph above and more. More importantly, it has to be enforced, not theatrically, not selectively, and not only when the media calls. It has to be enforced consistently, internally, early, and often. A profession that asks for authority, weapons, discretion, public money, legal protection, and community respect has to accept a higher standard than "we can get away with it." Law enforcement is, by and large, compensated at a level that reflects the seriousness of the work and the risk attached to it. Accountability has to catch up. This is not anti-police, it is the opposite. If policing is going to survive as a respected profession, it has to stop defending small acts of dishonesty as minor, isolated, explainable, or not worth the fight. Small acts of corruption are not small when they become the culture. They become the million small cuts that bleed public trust until the institution wonders why people no longer believe it. How does public trust suffer when police officers lie? Michigan case offers an example. Soft corruption, characterized by daily dishonesty, favoritism, and selective accountability, erodes public trust. Examples from Boston, California, Aurora, and Prince George's County illustrate how soft corruption, even if not criminal, damages the profession. It contributes to staffing problems and damages public confidence. Policing needs to adopt a higher standard of accountability, moving beyond merely avoiding major scandals to consistently addressing smaller acts of dishonesty. This is how we rebuild trust. Corruption is a word we often associate with major scandals, bribery, extortion, or gross criminal misconduct. But there is another kind of corruption that is far more common, yet deeply damaging: soft corruption. Soft corruption isn't about one big payoff. It's about the daily erosion of standards. It's the daily dishonesty, favoritism, and selective accountability that happens within the routine of policing, often flying under the radar. When accountability becomes selective, public trust vanishes. We see it in cases from Boston to California, where routine disregard for the rules erodes the profession from within, making staffing and recruitment even harder. To rebuild trust, policing must adopt a higher standard. It's not enough to simply avoid major scandals. Agencies must consistently address even the smallest acts of dishonesty to restore the integrity of the badge. 9 Boston police officers were arrested for an overtime fraud scheme. This is a clear example of how soft corruption erodes the public trust in policing. Soft corruption is more than just a headline. It's the routine disregard for rules that eventually breaks the entire system. Routine disregard for rules and corruption erodes trust in policing. All corruption is criminal, but sometimes it's just routine. Attorney General Bonta announces charges against 54 California Highway Patrol officers in East Los Angeles. State of California, Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General. This routine disregard for rules erodes public trust. Office of Public Affairs, Justice Department announces findings of investigation into Chicago Police Department, United States Department of Justice. Office of Public Affairs, Justice Department finds civil rights violations by the Louisville Metro Police Department and Louisville Jefferson County Metro Government, United States Department of Justice.